You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. The Man Between Floors. If you have never seen Nero Wolfe receive a wet evening, as though it were a personal insult, you have missed one of the superior spectacles of New York. Rain offended him on principle. It brought mud to the stoop, damp to the hall, and imprecision to schedules, and he disliked all three. On the Thursday when Alfred Berrin died on Riddle Street, the rain had been coming down since 4 o'clock with the patient nastiness of a creditor, and by 7 the windows of the old brownstone on West 35th Street were stippled with it. Inside, however, civilization persisted. Fritz had produced a supper that had briefly reconciled Wolfe to the continued existence of mankind. Theodore had finished with the orchids upstairs, and I had settled at my desk in the office with the evening papers and the cheerful expectation that no one with a problem would have the decency to wait until morning. Wolfe was in his chair with a book propped against one hand and a glass of beer near enough to show confidence, but not intimacy. The room was warm, the lamps were kind, and the city beyond the curtains was welcome to drown itself if it chose. Then the telephone rang. I picked it up and said, "Nero Wolfe's office." "Archie Goodwin speaking." A male voice answered, clipped and careful. "I should like to speak with Mr. Wolfe at once. My name is Lawrence Ashcroft. It concerns a death in my building. There are many ways of improving an evening, and some of them involve a corpse." "What building?" I asked. "The Ashcroft Building, Riddle Street. Alfred Berrin has been found dead in his 7th floor office." That got my attention, not because I knew Alfred Berrin personally, but because in New York a financier dead at his desk is never merely a dead financier. There is always a ring of satellites: money, women, envy, obligations, lawsuits, private memoranda, and men who say they are ruined as if it were a religious injury. "Stay there," I said, and handed the receiver to Wolfe. He put the book down without haste, took the phone, and said, "Nero Wolfe." I listened to his half of it, which is often enough to enjoy the shape of things. "Yes, number. If Mr. Berrin is dead, I fail to see how that improves by telephone. The police are there." "Good. Then your impulse toward me is premature and probably expensive." No sign of disorder. "An elevator operator with exact times. PFW, yes, that may interest me. My assistant will come." He hung up and looked at me. "Well," I said. "Archie Raincoat, Riddle Street. Alfred Berrin, financier, has been found dead in his office on the 7th floor of the Ashcroft Building. His desk is in perfect order. His watch was smashed beneath him. The building's elevator operator, one Walter Hobb, states calmly that he knows the exact time at which every visitor went up and came down. That sounds convenient." "Yes," Wolfe said, "which is why it is offensive. Lawrence Ashcroft, owner of the building, or enough of it." He telephoned, not out of grief, but because he suspects an embarrassment. That too is offensive, but useful. I got my coat and hat. "What do you want first?" "Everything, but especially the operator." "Because he has exact times." "Because," Wolfe said, lifting the beer, "exactness is often a disguise worn by uncertainty." That was polished enough to deserve writing down. But I was already halfway to the hall. Riddle Street lies in one of those middle Manhattan neighborhoods where money and ambition have been trying for years to decide whether they hate or admire each other. The Ashcroft Building stood on the corner. 12 stories of sober limestone with brass trim, the kind of structure erected in a decade when financiers believed architecture should reassure depositors without encouraging poetry. The rain had put a gloss on the stone and turned the street lamps into blurred medals. A police car sat at the curb, and a uniformed man in the lobby gave me the sort of look policemen reserve for private investigators who are not paying city taxes. I handed over my name and Kramer's, which works often enough to become habit. He let me pass. The lobby was marble, dimly golden, and expensive in a way that no longer gets built, because accountants discovered their rights. At the far wall stood the elevator. A caged old automatic manual hybrid with polished brass, and a uniformed operator inside, Walter Hobb, presumably. Near the mailboxes, a tall, dry man in evening clothes and irritation detached himself from a pillar and came toward me. "Mr. Goodwin?" "Yes." "Lawrence Ashcroft, thank heaven." Ashcroft was around 50, thin enough to look elegant until he moved and became merely nervous. His hair was too carefully dark to be honest, and his face had those smooth lines money buys in barbershops and loses in probate courts. He shook my hand with the brisk gratitude of a man eager to convert emotion into delegation. "Inspector Kramer is upstairs," he said. I told him I had called Mr. Wolf. He was not charmed. "That proves his health is good. Take me up." Before we got to the elevator, I took a look at Walter Hobb. He was about 60, maybe a little over. Trim in the way men get when routine has replaced appetite, with a pale, calm face and the sort of eyes that see movement as obligation. He wore the building uniform, as if he had been born to brass buttons and quiet observation. "This is Mr. Hobb," Ashcroft said. "Walter, this is Mr. Goodwin." Hobb inclined his head just enough to show breeding or practice. "Sir," I said, "you're the man with the Times." "Yes, Sir Good. Keep them warm. I'll want them." His face did not change. "I can tell you now if you wish." Latter, truth likes suspense. We went up. The 7th floor held 3 offices and a central corridor carpeted in dark green. Alfred Berrin's suite occupied the front corner, with frosted glass on the door, and his name in black letters that looked permanent enough to survive death. A patrolman stood outside. Inside, the place was lit, heated and thick, with the particular silence that follows both work and catastrophe. Kramer was in the main office, broad and red-faced, and just beginning to resent me properly. He turned as I entered. "Goodwin, Inspector. Where's the genius?" "At home, cultivating his mass." Kramer snorted. "He sent you." "As always," he says. "Hello," which in his language means nothing. That has never improved your disposition. I went in. Alfred Berrin lay on the carpet behind a great walnut desk, half on one side, as if he had risen, and then changed his mind violently. He was in his late 50s, maybe 60, thick in the shoulders, expensive in the suit, and dead enough to stop argument. One arm was crooked beneath him. Under the chest, partly pinned by the weight, was the smashed face of a gold watch, its crystal broken, the case bent. The desk above him was absurdly neat. Blotter, square, pen aligned, correspondence, tray ordered, desk lamp on, no overturned chair, no spilled drink, no sign of a quarrel except the corpse. That interested me more than the corpse. A doctor in a black bag, and an expression of practiced caution, looked up from kneeling near the body. "You're Goodwin, so they say." He nodded once. "Dr. Simeon Pratt. Berrin's dead, naturally, as for how. I'd rather not marry a guess yet. There's bruising at the throat, though not enough at first glance to justify certainty. He may have collapsed, fallen against the desk, and crushed the watch beneath him, or someone may have assisted him. Always kind to have alternatives." He gave me a dry look and went back to his inspection. I took the room in carefully. Big office, windows overlooking the wet street. Safe in the wall, cabinets locked. A leather client chair opposite the desk, side table with siphon and glasses untouched. No ashtray on the desk, but one on a credenza with 2 cigarette stubs and an extinguished cigar. It was the kind of office designed to suggest that money was managed here without vulgar strain, which made the dead man on the rug look doubly untidy. Kramer came in behind me. Well, if he was killed, the killer either knew how Berrin liked things left or had enough nerve to tidy after. Kramer grunted. "Nothing missing we know of. Secretary says Berrin was methodical. Desk could have looked like that before he dropped. Could have." He pointed with his chin at the body. "Watch smashed under him. If it stopped on impact, time of collapse is 6:42. I squatted for a look. The hands stood there under splintered crystal, frail and theatrical. "That's too pretty," I said. Kramer's eyes narrowed. "Meaning?" meaning if a watch tells you exactly when a man died, it's either a gentleman or a liar. Wolf taught you that. Number the watch did. He made a sound that suggested I should be licensed and watched. I asked for the people, and he gave them to me because if he didn't, I'd get them anyway, and he knew it. Alfred Berrin's secretary, Miss Alice Fenn, was in the outer room. Lawrence Ashcroft had already spoken. 2 business callers had been in and out that afternoon. 1 junior partner from a brokerage, 1 lawyer, and there was the building operator, Walter Hobb, with his recital of times. Which is the oddest part, Kramer admitted. He says Berrin came in at 4:12, lawyer went up at 5:03 and came down at 5:21, brokerage man up at 5:34 and down at 5:40, 2 then a woman in a grey raincoat up at 6:07 and down at 6:26, then no one until Ashcroft came up after 7 because Fenn got worried when Berrin didn't answer. That's a nice clean row of figures. Too clean, Kramer demanded. I don't know yet, but Wolf says exactness is often a disguise worn by uncertainty. Kramer rolled his eyes. Tell him from me that uncertainty can wear handcuffs too. I left him to his corpse and went outside to the main office, where Alice Fenn sat at a typewriter table, looking less like a secretary than like someone who had been standing at attention too long and no longer believed the war justified it. She was around 35, fair, composed, with good cheekbones and the sort of clear grey eyes that make men assume innocence until they use them. Mr. Goodwin, she said. Mr. Ashcroft told me. Yes, you worked for Berrin for 6 years. Then you deserve a pension. The corner of her mouth moved. I deserved worse. That was promising. How was he to work for? Demonstrative in economy, cautious in trust, and very exact. Everybody in this case is exact. That was Mr. Berrin's favorite vice. I asked about the day. She answered without embroidery. Berrin had come in late because of rain, stayed in his office most of the afternoon, dictated letters, saw the lawyer, saw the brokerage man, sent her home at 6 because he expected 1 more caller and wanted no interruptions. What? Caller? He didn't say. Did he often dismiss you for private meetings? Sometimes. Men, women, that depended on the private matter. Did you know the woman in the grey raincoat? Number I saw her only from the lift medium height. Hat pulled low, veil or netting at the face because of the weather. Did Mr. Berrin seem nervous? Number irritated. Then pleased. He had received a telephone call at about 5:50, after which he told me I might leave at 6 and that he was not to be disturbed under any pretext. Pleased because of the call, she considered. Not pleased in a cheerful way, pleased as if an expectation had been confirmed. That was useful. Did he mention the caller? Number did he ever? Only when it suited him to have a name repeated. I thanked her and went back to the elevator. Walter Hobb was still there, which is one of the excellent things about elevator operators. Unless they are criminals or poets, they tend to remain where put. He looked at me with the same composed readiness. Rain beaded faintly on the glass of the outer doors behind him, and the lobby had emptied enough that his voice, when he spoke, carried like something wrapped and placed carefully on a shelf. You wanted the Times, sir. I do. He gave them to me exactly as Kramer had, but with more confidence and no visible strain. 4:12, 5:03, 5:20, 1, 5:30, 4, 5:40, 2, 6:07, 6:26. He gave each one as if reciting prayer or interest due. You remember them that exactly? Yes, sir. How? I keep a mental note of arrivals and departures. It is part of my work. That's devotion. It is routine. You know every tenant's movements. Not everyone, only enough. That's modest. How long have you been operating here? 18 years. Then you know all the sins in the building. His face remained calm, only the elevator's share of them. I liked him a little then, which was inconvenient. Did you know the woman? No, sir. You didn't ask her name. It is not my function to interrogate callers. Did she go direct to 7? Yes. Did she say anything? Numbered. Did she seem in a hurry? Not especially. And when she came down? The same. Calm. Yes, sir. That was worth carrying home too. A calm, unknown woman in a grey raincoat on a wet evening, moving through the building on exactly timed minutes, up and down as tidy as entries in a ledger, too tidy by half. Ashcroft hovered at the lobby pillar while I finished. He wanted to be useful and feared being involved, which is the usual client blend. I asked him one more question. Who hated Alfred Berrin enough to kill him? He spread his hands, half of finance and a portion of the church. More personal, he thought. There was his nephew Roger Berrin, perpetually in want of money. A woman named Mrs. Vale Mercer, once associated with him in some affair, now stale. A partner he squeezed out. 2 years ago, and perhaps anyone who had ever trusted him in a hallway. I said, that's a broad menu. It was a broad life. Back at the brownstone, with my coat steaming gently in the hall and Wolf, exactly where I had left him because the center of gravity does not stroll. I gave him the whole thing. He listened without interruption, which is how I know he is interested. When I reached Walter Hobb and his recital of times, Wolf shut his eyes. He said. That's deep. Number merely compressed. I finished with the grey raincoat, the smashed watch, the perfect desk, and Alice Fenn's account of the phone call that made Berrin pleased and private. Wolf opened his eyes. Good. 3 things. Only 3? For the moment. First, the desk in perfect order is either truth or theatre. We shall discover which. Second, the smashed watch may or may not indicate the time of death. But anyone who accepts it at once deserves to lose money in securities. Third, Walter Hobb's exactness is intolerable. Because it's false, because it is too ready. Men remember approximately, unless they have reason not to. He says it's routine. Yes, that may mean he is admirable, or it may mean he has had occasion to practice. I sat down. Kramer likes the timeline. Of course, policemen adore anything that appears to shorten labor. The operator says who went up and came down and when, and at once the field narrows. It is a ready-made frame. You think he built it? I think, Wolf said, reaching for the beer, that exactness often arrives in cases of murder, not as truth, but as a proposal. One should inspect who benefits by accepting it. That was Wolf all over. Give him a dead financier, a smashed watch, a perfect desk, and an elevator operator with a timetable neat enough to print. And he does not ask first who killed the man. He asks who has been kind enough to simplify the answer. Outside. The rain kept at the city. Inside, Fritz came to the door and announced coffee, which meant the household still believed in continuity. Alfred Berrin lay dead on the 7th floor of the Ashcroft building, with his watch broken under him, and his office as tidy as a banker's conscience in public. Walter Hobb, between floors and apparently above confusion, had supplied the police with a chronology, so exact it might have come engraved. Wolf did not believe in engravings, he believed in people, and people, unlike elevator dials, seldom move as neatly as they claim. Chapter 2. The Clockwork Testimony. By 10 o'clock the next morning, Walter Hobb had become, in the minds of the police, the most useful man in New York. That is always dangerous. Kramer had him at the Ashcroft building lobby, as if he were a civic monument. Upright in his uniform, hands easy at his sides, voice calm, face composed, and memory polished until it shone. If Berrin's murderer had left a signed confession on the blotter, Kramer could hardly have been more pleased. I had gone back to Riddle Street under instructions from Wolf that were plain enough in words and less plain in intent. Listen to the operator again, he had said over breakfast. Do not merely hear him. Men who lie by invention usually overdo emotion. Men who lie by discipline underdo uncertainty. That sounds chewy. It is exact return before lunch, unless you are run over, in which case be prompt afterward. So I went. The morning had lost the rain but not the damp. Riddle Street looked as if someone had washed the soot and left the disappointment. The Ashcroft building stood there in its limestone respectability, with the lobby brass brightened by weather and usage. Hobb was in his cage, and Kramer was in the lobby with Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins, who looked as if he had been sent to admire certainty and was trying to. Kramer saw me and grunted. Goodwin. Inspector still collecting exactness by the pound. He ignored that. Hobb here has gone over it again. Same times, same order. You want to hear it. Hear it. Music to my ears. Walter Hobb inclined his head. He had a pale, spare face, the sort that seems built not for expression but for endurance. His eyes were not dull. They were merely economical. He did not waste them on the unnecessary. You wish me to repeat it, sir? I do, slowly enough for a backward mind. Yes, sir. He spoke, as if reading from a card inside his skull. Mrs. Mira Berrin went up at 8. 10 Mr. Harold Vane at 8:20. 2 Dr. Seth Corwin at 8:30. 1 No one else went up after 8:40. No one came down from the 7th floor after Dr. Corwin until the body was found. Kramer gave me a look that said, well, I said, that's handsome again. He did it again. No hesitation, no correction, no searching glance at the ceiling where honest memories usually go to look for themselves. Just the times smooth as marbles in a drawer. Who is Mira Berrin? I asked Kramer. Widow, or enough of one they'd been separated in everything but law and annoyance. Harold Vane, attorney, family advisor, so he calls himself. And Corwin, doctor, saw Berrin regular for the heart and nerves. I looked back at Hobb. You remember them that exactly because they stood out? He said, no, sir, because I notice such things every day. Yes, sir. Every tenant, every caller, every floor, not everyone, only those connected with offices that require attention. That's a nice phrase. What does it mean? It means, he said, that in a building of this kind one observes what may later matter. That was good, too good. Maybe. Not flashy, not defensive, just smooth, like a tray carried level, Pearlie said. He's been here 18 years. I heard, I told him. He must know every foolishness the building has produced, Hobb said. Only the elevator's share of them, sir. That was the same line he had used on me the night before, word for word. I don't object to a man having a phrase, but I like to know when he takes it out of the drawer, Kramer said. All right, Goodwin, if Wolf wants the list, here it is. Mira Berrin up at 8. 10, down at 8. 17, Harold Vane up at 8. 20, 2, down at 8. 20, 9, Dr. Corwin up at 8. 31, down at 8:40. Then nobody till Ashcroft went up after 9 and found him. I turned to Hobb. And you're sure of every return too? Yes, sir. Not approximately. No, sir. Well, I said, if I ever mislay a week, I'll come to you. That won me nothing. Hobb remained composed. Kramer remained pleased. Pearlie remained Pearlie. I went upstairs. Alfred Berrin's office had been turned into that intermediate state between scene of death and scene of paperwork. The body was gone, but the room had kept its offense. The desk was still too neat. The carpet still showed the place where a man had died. Miss Alice Fenn was at her typewriter in the outer office dealing with interruption, as if it were one more dictated letter she would eventually be allowed to finish. Mr. Goodwin. Miss Fenn, the building has become punctual overnight. Her mouth moved faintly. It was punctual before, only less noticed. That's a secretary's answer. I'm after a human one. She looked at me with those level grey eyes of hers. Mr. Hobb is extremely attentive. You trust his times. I trust that he believes them. That was better. Not the same thing, I said. Mira Berrin, elegant, controlled, no longer living with Alfred, but still entitled by law, money, and habit to come when she chose. She had arrived with no umbrella, and a face that said umbrellas were for dependents. She was with Alfred 7 minutes, perhaps a little more. Miss Fenn had heard no raised voices. Harold Vane, the attorney, had come next, tall, dry, exact in dress and manner. He, too, had stayed only minutes. Dr. Seth Corwin had arrived after that, and remained longest. Corwin was Alfred Berrin's physician, and had lately been seeing him often for strain, which in wealthy men covers sins, ulcers, and impending scandal according to dosage. "And after Corwin?" I asked. "No one that I saw. You left when?" "A little after 8:30. Mr. Berrin had said I was not needed." "You didn't see the doctor go?" "Number, I was already downstairs by then." "Did Berrin expect the 3? "Yes, all of them." She hesitated. "Mrs. Berrin?" "Yes, Mr. Vane." "Yes, the doctor?" "I think yes." "Anyone else?" He had 2 phone calls near 8. One from Mrs. Berrin's hotel, one from Mr. Vane's office. The third may have been arranged earlier. I took that and went to see Mira Berrin. She was staying at a hotel on Madison, because women in that income bracket frequently are, when they are not staying with husbands they no longer like. She received me in a sitting room that had flowers enough to suggest apology from several directions. Mira Berrin was around 40, dark, handsome in the expensive, deliberate way, and so controlled she made Helen of the previous case look like a kitchen clock. She did not ask me to sit until she had decided whether I was furniture. "You are Archie Goodwin. That is the accepted diagnosis." "You work for Nero Wolfe. My husband despised him." "That can't be helped now." She gave me one dry glance. "Number, I suppose not." She admitted, going to the Ashcroft building at 8:10 or thereabouts, which at once put her in better standing with me than Walter Hobb. "There was a matter of trust income," she said. "Alfred had altered a provision and I objected. We quarreled. Then I left at 8:17. She looked at me. I did not consult a chronometer in the elevator. Pity, it's popular there. Mr. Hobb notices more than any man ought. That can be a virtue. Or a profession. I asked whether Alfred expected Harold Vane. Certainly, Vane had drawn the papers. And Dr. Corwin? He may have. Alfred had lately been consulting doctors as if they were tipsters. That was nice. Was he afraid? Afraid, number irritated by age, perhaps. Irritated by rivals, certainly. Irritated by the possibility that some younger men were as dishonest as he had once been, and better at it. I liked her almost enough to distrust it. Harold Vane received me in chambers downtown among law books and upholstered restraint. He was thin, courteous, and so dry he could have been filed. He admitted seeing Alfred Berrin that evening. 7 minutes, perhaps, he said. Or 8:20, 2 to 8:20. 9. He blinked once. If the operator says so, and you. I say I was there briefly. We reviewed a trust instrument and an appointment for Friday. Nothing else? Nothing you are entitled to? I leaned back. Mr. Vane, on a scale from 1 to pious, where would you place Alfred Berrin? He almost smiled. At law, Mr. Goodwin, scales are for argument in life. I should place him at profitable. Were you fond of him? Number, that helps. Dr. Seth Corwin was easier. Doctors often are because they grow used to facts and bored with postures, if you catch them between patients. Corwin was broad, shouldered, prematurely grey, and not sentimental about financiers. Yes, I saw Berrin that evening, he said. He was overwrought, not dying. I advised rest, less liquor, and fewer schemes. He ignored me with dignity. Did he keep you till 8:40? Approximately. Approximately. Bless you, he frowned. Why? Because I've spent the morning with a man who remembers minutes as if God issued them engraved. Corwin's mouth twitched. Walter Hobb? Yes. He notices everything, does he? Yes. But not because he is miraculous, because he writes things down. That stopped me. Where? Corwin shrugged. On a pad or card, I assume. Years ago I saw him glance at a little notebook after a delivery argument in the lobby. I thought nothing of it. There it was, a lump in the porridge, back at the brownstone before lunch. I found Wolf at his desk, as expected, with Fritz hovering in the doorway, with the patient expression of a man who can produce perfect food, but not perfect clients. "Well," Wolf said, "I gave it to him whole." Hobbs' recitation. Alice Fenn's trust in Hobbs' belief, rather than his accuracy. Mira's refusal to honor the minutes. Vane's dryness, Corwin's approximation, and the little notebook. At that Wolf's eyes opened fully. A notebook. Yes. Not mental note, Number Wolf grunted. Good. Not good for Hobb. Possibly excellent for us. Fritz took that as permission to announce lunch and withdrew again. Wolf ignored him, which shows depth of interest. I said, "Kramer is delighted. Murder is simpler when it arrives with minutes attached." "Policemen," Wolf said, "are often delighted by anything that appears to reduce the labor of thought." That sounds unfair and accurate. It is both. He leaned back. Honest memory is lumpy. It contains gaps, hesitations, estimates, revisions, and the occasional embarrassment. False confidence is smooth. Hobbs' recital was smooth. That alone does not condemn him. But if he has polished recollection from notes, then the question becomes, when were the notes made, and for whom? I sat. You think someone may have polished his recollection for him? Yes, or he polished it for himself. Both possibilities are offensive. There's another angle, I said. If he wrote the times as people went up and down, fine. But if he rewrote or rehearsed them later, the Polish might not be innocent. Wolf nodded. Exactly. A time written at once may still be false, but a time remembered too perfectly after emotion and police talk has had a night to settle is worse. He drummed his fingers once on the blotter. Archie, this afternoon you will get that notebook if it exists, or learn why it does not. Also find out whether Hobbs' habits of notation were known to the tenants, especially Alfred Berrin. That fills a cheerful day. It fills yours. Mine is already fully employed. Of course it was. Nero Wolf intended to sit exactly where he was and think, while I went back out into the damp city to untangle a building full of precise people and one dead financier. But he had already done the useful part. Walter Hobbs' testimony had come off too neatly, like a watch whose hands never stutter. Mira Berrin at 8:10, Harold Vane at 8:22, Dr. Seth Corwin at 8:30, no one after 8:40. The police loved it because certainty is cheap when supplied by a uniform. Wolf distrusted it because real memory does not arrive in a row unless someone has combed it. And when recollection looks too exact to be doubted, it is often because doubt has already been worked out of it by a careful hand. The question now was whether Walter Hobbs' smoothness belonged to habit, vanity, or fear. With luck, by dinner, I would know which floor that elevator had really stopped on. Chapter 3. The office above the street by 1 o'clock that afternoon, the 7th floor of the Ashcroft building had begun to feel less like a place of business than a locked box somebody had shaken hard and then set upright again for appearances. That suited Alfred Berrin. From all I could gather, he had conducted his life on the principle that order is more convincing than kindness and often more profitable. His office above Riddle Street reflected that creed exactly. Locks where another man would use trust, ledgers where another might keep memory, and a desk so disciplined it looked less like furniture than a warning. If you wanted to ask Alfred Berrin a favor, you had the feeling you would first have to account for yourself in triplicate. Wolf had sent me back after lunch with one instruction that sounded simple and wasn't arrange the dead man. That's ambitious. In your mind, idiot, a murder is easier to solve when the victim is no longer a corpse on a rug, but a person with habits. That was Wolf. He would sit in his chair, drink beer, and tell me to turn a financier into a geometry problem. But he was right, which was inconsiderate. So I went to the Ashcroft building again and spent the afternoon assembling Alfred Berrin from the testimony of those who had survived him. The first and best source was Alice Fenn, because good secretaries always know more than they tell, and better than most men suspect. She sat in the outer office with a stack of correspondence and the expression of a woman who had been promoted overnight from secretary to custodian of ruins. "Mr. Goodwin," she said without looking up from the letters, "has Mr. Wolfe decided we are all assassins, or is he waiting for supper? He likes a little uncertainty before supper. It improves the appetite." That won me almost half a smile. "I need Berin as a man," I said. "Not a body, not a desk, not a watch, a man." She considered. "Then begin with this. Alfred Berin believed privacy was the only safe form of power." That sounds expensive. It was. He locked everything. He opened his own files. He signed nothing until he had read it twice and distrusted it once. He trusted ledgers more than people because ledgers, if arranged correctly, cannot flatter. Did he like people at all? In the abstract, perhaps. At a distance, certainly. Up close, he preferred usefulness. That rang true. I asked about the family. "Mira Berin is his niece," she said. "Widowed, not wealthy, and working in the same building in a small investment office on the 4th floor. The police first assumed wife because of the surname, which was lazy of them. Alfred had no wife, only relatives and opinions. That improved continuity nicely, even if only I knew how much it needed improving." "She stood to gain?" I asked. "If he revised his will, yes, he had threatened to. He had also threatened not to. With Alfred, testamentary matters were a species of weather. And Harold Vane." Miss Fenn stopped with a letter half sorted. "Mr. Vane is technically counsel, but in practice he had gone far beyond that. Advisor, arranger, negotiator, half-partner in some deals and denier of them in others. They had quarreled lately over missing funds." "How missing?" "Not vanished, misplaced, deferred, shifted, disguised. Mr. Berin believed Vane had been too imaginative with a trust account connected to a bond issue. Did Berin have proof? Enough to be dangerous, not enough to be serene. And Dr. Corwin," she set the letter down, "he had been treating Mr. Berin for nerves and exhaustion, whether that meant genuine illness or the natural strain of living like Alfred Berin. I can't say he came often, too often perhaps. Too often for medicine. For comfort," she said dryly, "or for something that resembled it. That was worth keeping." I went down to the 4th floor and found Mira Berin in an office so much smaller and less important than Alfred's that it felt almost democratic. She was at a desk by the window, dark, suited, dark, haired and composed as ever, though the composure now had fatigue at the edges. "You again," she said. "I improve with repetition." "No," she said, "but one grows resigned." She confirmed what Alice Fenn had said. Alfred was her uncle, not her husband, though he had done enough managing of her affairs to qualify for several domestic roles at once. "My father left me little," she said. "My uncle left me uncertainty. I worked here because he preferred relations under observation. That sounds warm." "It was economical. Did you expect to inherit?" She gave me a level look. "I expected Alfred to use inheritance as leverage while alive, and as revenge if dead. That's not yes or no. It is the only honest form of either." I asked about the will. She admitted Alfred had spoken of revisions, hinted at them, and once stated outright that gratitude should not be left to accident. Whether that meant she was in or out depended, as Alice Fenn had put it, on the weather. "And Vane?" I asked. Her mouth tightened. "They had been at daggers for a month. Over funds. Yes, Harold called them temporary transfers. Alfred called them theft done in neckties. That was good enough to frame. Did Alfred trust him? Number, but he used him. Men like my uncle often keep precisely the people they most distrust because it gives them exercise. And Dr. Corwin. Alfred was fond of saying Corwin charged by the pulse and encouraged symptoms for sport. Yet he kept seeing him. That should tell you something. It tells me Alfred disliked paying for peace and did it anyway. For a man with money, she said. He hated uncertainty. Lately there was too much of it in him. That brought me to Corwin in his office, where medicine was being practiced under protest from 2 patients and a receptionist. He gave me 10 minutes, and all of them dry. Yes, Berin was exhausted, he said. Yes, nervous. Yes. overworked in the manner of men who believe their own importance must be hand-carried. Was he afraid? Corwin removed his spectacles, looked at me, and cleaned them. Doctors always seem to do that, just before deciding whether truth will damage a client who has stopped paying. He was suspicious, he said, which is not the same thing, he felt, watched by competitors, used by associates, and squeezed by family expectation. None of that was entirely false. Did you treat him for the heart? Number for tension, sleeplessness, strain, and the consequences of treating every conversation as a negotiation. Did he talk? Too much and too selectively. About Vane. Yes, about Mira. Only in the tone of a man discussing an annuity he regretted. About his will. Corwin put the spectacles back on. He liked mentioning it because everyone else had the decency to look uncomfortable. That fit too neatly to doubt. I saved Vane for last because lawyers improve only toward evening, and then merely as prey. He received me in his chambers with all the polished austerity of a man who believed paper should frighten people before it was even read. Goodwin, that lack of title is common among your profession. Among mine it's economy. He did not object. Men who choose dryness as a style are always glad when someone else saves them effort. I went at him directly, missing funds. His eyes did not move, which with lawyers is either innocence or excellent training. Temporary dislocations, he said. That sounds like embezzlement with cufflinks. It sounds like liquidity pressure in a complicated holding structure, and Alfred Berrin called it theft. Alfred called many things theft when he was not the one profiting. There was real heat in that, carefully banked. Good, were you afraid he'd expose you? Number, were you afraid he'd ruin you? Number, you answer too smoothly. He almost smiled. I am a lawyer. Smoothness is often only punctuality. That was a nice line, and I hated wasting it on him. He admitted the quarrel, more than admitted it. He let enough contempt show to establish that the break between him and Berrin had passed professional disagreement and entered the more fertile ground of mutual knowledge. Each knew where the other's skeletons were filed. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolf was in the office with the afternoon light, going gold on the books, and making him look even more like a carved authority than usual. He listened while I reported. When I finished, he said, "Good, now Berrin exists. That's cheerful. Number merely necessary." I sat at my desk. His niece Mira may gain if the will changes. Vane may gain if Berrin stops talking about missing funds. Corwin may have known enough about his nerves and habits to assist or conceal something, and Hobbs' timing seems to shield one of them too neatly. Yes, which one? Wolf shut his eyes. That is the wrong question. I asked it to save time. You asked it to avoid thinking. The proper question is, whose danger diminishes most if the police accept Hobbs' schedule without abrasion? I thought it over. Mira up at 8. 10 and down 7 minutes later, Vane up at 8. 20. 2 and down at 8. 29. Corwin up at 8. 30. 1 and down at 8:40. No one after that. A perfect descending staircase of innocence. I said, Corwin benefits if death is later than his exit. Vane too, Mira less, because she's first and already protected by domesticity. Wolf opened his eyes. Better. And if Hobbs' times are polished, the Polish may be shielding the last recognized visitor, the one nearest the body. Quite possibly. Or it may be arranging distance around someone not officially there at all. That was vintage Wolf and properly annoying. You think there may have been another visitor? I think any timeline supplied too readily deserves the discourtesy of disassembly. He reached for the beer and took a measured swallow. Alfred Berrin was a man who ruled by locks, ledgers, and the careful distribution of unease. Such men accumulate enemies of a particular kind, not hot fools, but controlled ones. Mira lived under financial dependence and expectation, Vane under suspicion and exposure, Corwin under intimacy and professional secrecy. Each had reason to wish Berrin silenced. And Hobb, Wolf's lips twitched. Hobb had reason to be believed. That was the heart of it. The operator's tidy schedule made murder look mechanical. Up, down, no one after 8. 40 body later discovered. Clean, orderly, police friendly. But real evenings in office buildings are rarely so neat unless someone has ironed them. Outside, a horn complained on 35th Street. Upstairs, the orchids were receiving their regulated climate with more serenity than any human in the case. In the kitchen, Fritz was likely preparing dinner with the grim benevolence of a man who serves genius under constraints. And in the office, Wolf had reduced the problem to its proper shape, not which suspect seemed worst, but which one the elevator's clockwork testimony had been arranged to make safest. And when Nero Wolfe begins distrusting the exact minute at which a man went down in an elevator, somebody in the building is likely to have a very bad week. Chapter 4. The witness everyone believed by Thursday morning, Walter Hobb, had become what every policeman dreams of and every detective ought to distrust, a witness who improved with repetition. I had seen him twice, already in the lobby of the Ashcroft building, upright in his uniform behind the brass and glass of the elevator cage, pale, calm, and as beautifully arranged as the timetable he carried in his mouth. Kramer liked him because he was useful. Pearlie Stebbins liked him because he was orderly. Lawrence Ashcroft liked him because orderly witnesses help buildings recover their rent value. Even Alice Fenn, who trusted nobody without qualification, trusted that Walter at least trusted his own recital. Wolfe disliked him for the same reasons. That morning, after breakfast and the orchid rooms, Wolfe had sat in his chair with a beer, not yet touched, and said, "Bring me the operator. You want him here. Number, I do not want his damp uniform in this office. Go there, hear him again, and this time attend, not merely to his words, but to their machinery." That sounds like work. Yes, Wolfe said. It is one of the regrettable functions for which you are maintained. So I went. The rain had stopped and left the city looking as if it had not enjoyed the experience. Riddle Street was washed and still somehow dirty, which is one of New York's lesser triumphs. The Ashcroft building lobby shone with the sort of respectability that survives murder by being scrubbed before breakfast. Walter Hobb was in his cage, hands lightly placed, eyes attentive, without appearing curious. Kramer was nowhere in sight, which I took as a gift from Providence. "Morning, Mr. Hobb." "Good morning, sir. I've come to trouble your memory again." "You may do so." That was the first thing about him. Most men resent being asked to repeat themselves, or at least acknowledge the inconvenience. Walter Hobb accepted repetition the way a trained tenor accepts an encore, as a chance to prove consistency. I stood with one elbow on the brass and said, "How do you remember the time so exactly?" "I always check the brass wall clock above the cage between trips." He glanced upward as if the clock were a witness of superior character. It hung above the elevator doors, polished, authoritative, and public. One of those large building clocks that make office workers feel observed and late. "You always check it," I said. "Yes, sir. Every trip." "Not every trip, but when a tenant or visitor for an upper office is notable, I look. That's selective virtue. It is habit." He said it with the same calm certainty he had given the times themselves. No strain, no fidgeting, no impatience, just that smooth little flow, as if the answer had long ago been arranged in drawers and labeled. "All right," I said. "Then let's have it again slowly." He gave it to me, Mrs. Meriberin. Went up at 8:10 and came down at 8:17. Mr. Harold Vane went up at 8:20, 2 and came down at 8:20. 9. Dr. Seth Corwin went up at 8:30, 1 and came down at 8:40. No one after 8:40 until the body was found. Again. He did it again, exactly. Not just the numbers, the cadence, the breathing, the tiny pause after each name, as if punctuation had been agreed on. A natural memory repeated tends to slouch a little. It shifts its shoes. It remembers the bones, and then has to go after the elbows. Walter Hobb's memory marched. I said, "You've got a head for numbers." "Yes, sir." "You say that like a line." "It is true." "Maybe." But true things still usually come out differently each time. He looked at me without offense. I prefer accuracy. Who doesn't? He did not answer, which was an answer in itself. I let the elevator take me up to 7, then back down, not because I needed the trip, but because I wanted to see him in his ordinary function. He opened and closed the gate with smooth economy, announced floors without emphasis, and looked at the clock twice between movements. Habit, certainly, but habit alone was not the whole of it. There was rehearsal in him. On the third descent I asked, "How long have you worked this building?" 18 years, sir. You must know everybody. I know their movements. That's a colder thing. It is my business. Yes, I said, and business can be theatrical. That got me nothing. He left him and went upstairs to Alfred Berrin's office, where the atmosphere had advanced from death to administration. Alice Fenn was typing with the severity of a woman who intends to impose grammar on chaos if it kills her. She stopped when I entered. "Mr. Goodwin, you'll be glad to hear your elevator operator is a genius." That is not a word I should have chosen. No, he is efficient. Genius suggests imagination. He says he remembers the times because he checks the brass clock above the cage between trips. She nodded. Yes, that is his claim. Claim, she looked up from the typewriter. Mr. Goodwin, Walter Hobb has worked in that building nearly 2 decades. He notices things. Yes, but he also knows the value of being thought indispensable. There's a little sting in that. There is fatigue in it. Men who are paid to observe often begin to believe they understand what they observe. Do you think he's lying? Number, that was quick. I think he is too polished. That pleased me. Wolf's kind of woman. She ignored that. If you ask me what I did yesterday at 4:20, I can tell you perhaps. If you ask me again tomorrow, I will tell you somewhat differently, because I shall be remembering the first answer, as well as the event. That is human. Walter is less human on the subject. There it was, served tidy and hot. I asked whether Berrin himself trusted Hobb. Mr. Berrin trusted anyone useful under surveillance. That's not trust. Number, but it is close enough for finance. I took that home in my notebook and stopped on the way to see Pearlie, who was in the lobby regretting paperwork. He confirmed that Walter had repeated the same sequence to Kramer, to the medical examiner's man, to Lawrence Ashcroft, and probably to the marble floor if it had asked. Never varied a minute, Pearlie said. Never varied a breath, I told him. Back at the brownstone Wolf was exactly where reason likes to find him. In the office, in his chair, one hand on the arm, eyes closed, as if thought had weight, and he was balancing it. Well, he said. I gave him the lot. The clock above the cage, Walter's explanation, the identical cadence, Alice Fenn's opinion that he was not lying so much as over-arranged, Pearlie's confirmation that the sequence never changed by so much as a shoe button. When I finished, Wolf opened his eyes. Yes, he said softly. Now he interests me. That sounds ominous. It is. I sat at my desk. He says he has a head for numbers. Possibly he has a head for practice. Wolf reached for the beer and didn't drink it. Observe the distinction. A genuine memory, even when accurate, shows signs of life. It pauses, chooses, sometimes qualifies, sometimes resists. It has edges. Hobb's recital has none. Honest memory is lumpy. Yes. And false confidence is smooth. Precisely. He leaned back. The operator does not remember, he delivers. That was good enough to annoy me for not having phrased it first. Meaning, I asked. Meaning a memory repeated too perfectly may not be memory at all, but instruction. The room was very quiet then. Outside, New York was handling late morning with its ordinary racket, cabs objecting, trucks negotiating, lives colliding on schedules that no elevator operator could keep straight without divine help. Inside, with books along the walls and the orchids upstairs occupying their superior republic, Wolf had made the real shift in the case. Up to then, Walter Hobb had been merely a witness. Now he was a mechanism. I said, Instruction from whom? That, Wolf said, is the proper next question, not whether Hobb is polished, but who had reason to polish him. Mira, Vane, Corwin, Ashcroft, do not make a shopping list. Begin with advantage. All right, if the sequence is accepted as exact, then each visitor's distance from the murder is fixed. Mira safest first, Vane next, Corwin last. No unknown caller after, no hidden interval, no disorder. Yes, and if one of them needed the timeline neat, Walter provides it. Yes, I got up and crossed to the window, then back. You know what it sounds like. A man reciting a platform announcement. Same stops, same intervals, same voice. Wolf grunted. You have accidentally improved. He sounds not like someone remembering, but like someone repeating lines from a stage play. That was exactly it. Walter Hobb did not search for the evening. He performed it. The brass clock above the cage, the little story about his head for numbers, the equal spacing of the names and minutes. It all had the finish of something that had been gone over, whether with himself or with assistance, I said. Kramer still believes him. Of course. Witnesses everyone believes are the most useful ones to examine. That's one for the wall. Number merely common sense. Fritz came in then to announce luncheon, and Wolf actually frowned at him, which showed how deep Walter Hobb had gone into his machinery. Fritz withdrew in silent protest, which in this house is the equivalent of a labor strike. Wolf looked at me. This afternoon you will learn whether Hobb's devotion to the clock predates the murder or was discovered by him afterward as a moral ornament. Ask the tenants, the messengers, the janitor, the cleaning women, anyone who has ever ridden that elevator with him. If he has always been a human ledger, they will say so. If not, the smoothness is recent. That's a lot of humanity before dinner. Yes, endure it. He shut his eyes again, which meant the audience was over. But the idea remained in the room, hanging there as plainly as cigar smoke would have, if Wolf permitted it. Walter Hobb insisted he remembered the times because he always checked the brass wall clock above the cage between trips. He claimed a head for numbers and repeated the sequence exactly the same way each time, as though reading aloud from an invisible card. The police liked that because certainty is cheaper than thought. Wolf disliked it because real recollection has friction. A witness everyone believed had become the one witness he most wanted, rubbed the wrong way. And when Nero Wolfe begins to care less about what a man says than how he says it. Somebody in the story has usually mistaken polish for safety. Chapter 5. The minutes that fit too well by Friday morning, the case had done what complicated murders always do sooner or later. It had begun to look simpler than it was. That is one of the danger signs Wolfe respects most. A puzzle that grows cleaner under handling may be clarifying itself, but it may also be lying. Alfred Berrin's death in the Ashcroft building had now acquired a police version fit to print on a card. Mira Berrin up at 8, 10 and down at 8. 17, Harold Vane up at 8:20, 2 and down at 8:20. 9, Dr. Seth Corwin up at 8. 30, 1 and down at 8. 40, no one after. Death, therefore fixed somewhere in the gap that left Harold Vane safe downstairs and pointed a neat finger at Mira. Kramer liked it. Why not? He demanded from the red leather chair in our office at 11:30. The operator has the times the bodies found later. Mira's visit overlaps the last hour Berrin was certainly alive. Vane's too early, Corwin's too late to suit the doctor's own story, but not enough to damn him. Mira fits best. Wolf behind his desk with a beer glass near his right hand and his temper under stricter control than Kramer said. Because it fits too well, Kramer snorted. That's not evidence. No, Wolf said. It is intelligence. I was at my desk pretending to review notes and actually enjoying myself. Watching Wolf and Kramer argue is one of the free entertainments of my profession. Kramer went on. You always do this. When something lines up, you call it suspicious because it saves labor. Certainly, Wolf said. Murder is usually clumsy even when planned by clever people. It leaves corners. It produces noise, adjustment, approximation, panic, waste. A scheme that arranges everyone into a descending order of convenience. This one safe, that one exposed, that one professionally insulated, deserves discourtesy. Kramer glared at him. You got anything better? Not yet. That means no. That means, Wolf said, I am unwilling to become an imbecile, merely because an elevator operator has memorized arithmetic. Kramer left shortly after that in a mood fit to scorch wallpaper. When the front door had closed behind him, I said, He hates you most when you're right before proof. No, Wolf said. He hates me most when I am seated. That too was true. He pointed a finger at me, now the operator's first statement. I had spent the morning on that before Kramer arrived, because Wolf had sent me back to Riddle Street with instructions to learn not merely what Walter Hobbs said now, but what he had said first. On the night of the crime, before sleep, repetition, and policeman had improved his style. There is nothing like a first statement. It has dirt on it. By morning, everyone has had time to rehearse his innocence, edit his uncertainty, and discover respect for punctuation. I said, The first statement was vaguer. Wolf grunted. Good, tell it. I opened the notebook. Pearlie remembered it imperfectly, which helped. Walter did not, on the night itself, recite the times as he does now. He said Mrs. Mira Berin came up, a little after 8, Vane, some minutes later, and Corwin, around past. He thought the doctor came down, near 20 to 9, and that there were no more callers before Ashcroft went up later. Wolf's eyes opened a little wider. Excellent. That's one of your sweeter words. Yes, continue. The desk sergeant's scratch pad at the building confirms it. I persuaded him to let me see the notes by appealing to his vanity and buying coffee. The times written there are not the polished sequence. They are approximate 8:10-ish, 8:20, something. About 8:30. Doctor down before 8:40. None after. The exact minutes came later. Wolf leaned back. Ah, that was my own reaction. Only less upholstered. The room was quiet then, except for traffic outside, and one faint clink from the hall, probably Fritz setting down something in a manner designed to remind us he was maintaining civilization while we did otherwise. I said, Walter improved overnight. Yes, and you dislike that more than if he had contradicted himself. Much more, Wolf said. An open contradiction may be stupidity, fright, or pressure. A small improvement in memory is subtler and therefore often more revealing. I nodded, because by morning he had ceased, remembering the evening and begun remembering his account of it. Precisely, or someone had assisted that process. That was the center of it. Walter Hobbs had not blundered, altered, or reversed himself. He had done something cleverer and nastier. He had become better. The approximations of the night, those honest little humps and potholes memory carries when surprised by death, had been ironed flat into a recital tidy enough to guide an indictment. I said, the police timeline puts Harold Vane safely downstairs at the supposed moment of death. Yes, and points instead toward Mira. Yes. Which means that if someone wanted the shape of suspicion to fall that way, Walter's improved memory would be an excellent broom. Wolf's lips twitched. A coarse image, but suitable. Walter claimed, when pressed, that after going home he hadn't thought the matter over, and reconstructed the exact minutes from his habit of checking the brass wall clock above the cage. He said he had always been good with times. He said the first statement had been hurried because of confusion in the lobby. He said much the same thing to me, to Pearlie, and to Ashcroft, and each time he grew a shade smoother. Did he say he used notes? Wolf asked. Number not directly, but when I asked whether he had written anything down that night, he denied it too quickly. I searched the lobby wastebasket while he was upstairs with a delivery man. No notebook, no scraps, but the night porter says Walter spent 10 minutes alone in the little service room behind the cage before giving his formal statement. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Alone. Yes, that may be enough. It may also be a man washing his hands. Yes, but what he washed them of remains interesting. I got up and crossed to the window, then back. Let's walk the logic. If Walter's first statement was approximate, then the exact timeline is an after-product. And if that exact timeline favors one suspect over another, then the improvement is not innocent, unless we're very generous. We are not, Wolf said. Harold Vane benefits most from a precise early exit. Mira suffers most from a precise early visit near the last confident sighting. Corwin sits in the middle with medical fog around him. Good. So which one had access to Walter? That, Wolf said, is the next useful question. He closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them again. Not merely access in the literal sense of passing him in the lobby, access in the social sense. Who among them could speak to a building operator in a tone that might guide, encourage, or intimidate without making the effort obvious? I thought about it. Mira Berin. Proud and controlled, perhaps not. Corwin. Professional, detached, probably not unless by accident. Harold Vane. Dry, exact, practiced in shaping statements, deeply in need of time to look his way rather than another's, I said. Vain, yes, too obvious. Number merely unattractive. That was Wolf's version of a green light, I said. There's another piece. Alice Fenn says Berin liked things exact. The office, the ledgers, the locks. If someone wanted to sell the police a clean chronology, the building around him supplied the atmosphere for it. An exact operator in an exact building, serving an exact dead man. Wolf nodded once. Excellent. A false construction is always easier when it resembles the victim's habits. Hobbs' improved schedule feels plausible because Alfred Berin himself lived by arranged minutes and controlled access. That was handsome, and I resented him for reaching it before I did. He went on. Also, note this, if Hobb first reported approximations and later exactitudes, then the shift itself becomes evidence of pressure or self-persuasion. I care less whether each minute is false than whether the row of them was assembled after the fact. A maid to measure alibi or accusation. Outside, a truck banged over something metallic, and the street complained back. Inside, the old brownstone held the weather off and let thought proceed in rugs and book, spines and the stale comfort of Wolf's authority. I said, "What now?" "Now," Wolf said. "You see Vane again." That was coming. Yes, ask nothing directly at first. Let him talk about funds, trusts, legal forms and Berin's habits. Then, as if idly, mention Hobbs' admirable precision and watch whether Vane is surprised, approving, or prepared. That's a pretty spread. It is not pretty, it is necessary. He reached for the beer at last and drank. And Archie. Yes. If Vane attempts dryness, do not compete. You are outclassed. I live to be corrected. No, Wolf said. You live to be useful. That was the chapter, really. The minutes fit too well. The police had a timeline that placed Harold Vane comfortably downstairs at the supposed moment of death and angled suspicion instead toward Mira Berin, whose visit now seemed to overlap fatal opportunity. Wolf rejected it not because it was impossible, but because it was too finished. Murder seldom comes pressed and labeled. Even clever killers leave wrinkles. Walter Hobb had given a vaguer first statement on the night of the crime and grown more exact by morning. That small improvement in memory troubled Wolf more than any open contradiction would have. Contradictions can be stupidity. Refinement is intention. Somewhere, between the brass wall clock and the dawn, Walter's recollection had acquired Polish. And Nero Wolf, who distrusted Polish on anything except silver and language. Chapter 6. The lesson in precision, a coached witness, is one of the most troublesome animals in detection. A liar can be broken. He knows he is lying, and somewhere inside him the lie rattles against the bars. But a man who has been guided, corrected, reassured, and gently improved, until his uncertainty hardens into conviction, is another matter. He will defend the falsehood as if it were his own memory, because by then it is. Wolf said that to me at 4:15 on Saturday afternoon, after I had got back from Riddle Street with the name Edwin Pike and enough detail to make it useful. He was in the office, of course, seated behind his desk with the immovability of a geological event, his lips compressed and his eyes at half-mast. A glass of beer stood near his elbow, untouched for once, which meant he was interested. Fritz had come in 5 minutes earlier to say that the veal would not improve by waiting, and Wolf had actually ignored him, which in this house counts as an alarm bell. "Well," he said, Walter Hobb did not spend the hour after the murder alone composing exactness in the dark. "No." Number he spent most of it with Edwin Pike, the building manager. Wolf's brows moved. "Ah, that was all. But with Wolf an hour can carry 3 floors of architecture." I sat down at my desk and gave it to him from the beginning. After Kramer had cleared the scene on the first night, and the medical examiner's man had gone over Berin's office, Walter Hobb had not remained nobly at his post with his conscience and the brass wall clock. According to the night porter, the cleaning woman on the 3rd floor, and finally Pike himself, Walter had been taken into the little manager's room behind the lobby for quiet and a cup of coffee, and had remained there with Edwin Pike for nearly an hour before giving the polished version of his sequence again to the police. Pike had admitted it reluctantly, and with the kind of careful impatience men use when they wish to appear offended by a fact they have already rehearsed. "You found Pike?" Wolf asked. "Yes, in his office among rent rolls, fuse charts, and a framed certificate proving he can count boilers morally. And he's 50-ish, compact, brisk and self-important in the manner of men who supervise buildings and believe this is a political philosophy, knows every tenant's lease, every squeak in the service stairs, and exactly how much deference the owners owe him without ever paying. That sounds promising." "What did he say?" "I checked my notebook. He said Walter was badly shaken, and that he merely sat with him to settle him down before the police. Questioned him further, he called it kindness." Wolf made a sound through his nose. "Pooh." That was my own reaction, only shorter. I told him the rest. Pike said Walter had first given only approximate times because of confusion in the lobby and the shock of Berin's death. Pike said that once Walter had coffee and time to compose himself, he naturally recollected more exactly. Pike said that since Walter habitually looked at the brass clock above the cage, the refinement of times was both innocent and admirable. Pike said altogether too much for a man who claimed he had done nothing but offer sympathy. Wolf leaned back. "Did he tell you what they discussed during this hour of benevolence?" "Oh yes, nothing. Or rather, nothing except the usual calming remarks. Who had come in, whether Walter was sure about Mrs. Berin, whether Mr. Vane had not gone up shortly after, whether the doctor had not left around 20 to 9, whether no one else had gone up later, purely medicinal conversation." Wolf's eyes opened fully then. "Excellent. That word again. You're spoiling me." He ignored it, which was standard. Pike does not perceive the significance. Number he thinks a little help arranging a frightened man's thoughts is humane management. Yes, or says so. The room was very quiet outside. Saturday traffic on 35th Street, muttered and shoved along with its usual lack of principle. Inside the brownstone, the light from the window had gone pale gold on the book spines, and the air held a faint memory of coffee and Fritz's distant annoyance. It was an atmosphere made for thought, which was unfair to me because I had just finished doing the running. I said, "You don't believe in kindness that sharpens recollection?" "Certainly not. True kindness in such circumstances would have left the man vague and exhausted. Pike's variety is managerial. He wanted order quickly. That helps the building." "Yes, and perhaps someone else in it." That was where we were heading, and both knew it. I told him more. Edwin Pike had not merely sat with Walter. He had gone over the visitors with him, repeatedly. Mrs. Mira Berin first, Harold Vane next. Dr. Corwin after no one after 8:40. Walter, by Pike's own account, had been uncertain only in the beginning, and much clearer once the sequence was spoken aloud. I said, "That's the line that did it for me, spoken aloud." Wolf nodded. "Exactly. A memory can be coaxed into shape by repetition, particularly when a man of authority offers structure for it." Meaning Pike may not have told Walter to lie. He may only have nudged him into certainty. Yes, I thought it through again and said it the way Wolf likes it, in order. Walter sees people come and go. He is startled by the death. He gives the police an approximate account. A little after 8, some minutes later, around 9:30, near 20 to 9. Then Pike takes him aside, kindly and managerial. They go over it. Walter knows Pike expects order. Pike offers suggestions couched as reminders. Wasn't Mira at 10 past? Didn't Vane come a bit after 20 past? Didn't the doctor leave around 20 to 9? Walter, wanting to be useful and precise, begins accepting the improvements. By morning he's got a schedule instead of a recollection. Wolf pointed a finger. And because the schedule has now been absorbed into his own mind, he defends it as truth. That's the worst part. Yes, a coached witness is more dangerous than a dishonest one because he resents contradiction not as exposure, but as insult. That was the whole chapter in one line, and I wished I had said it first. I asked. Why would Pike do it? Wolf's lips moved. Several reasons present themselves. First, the innocent but odious one. He wanted the building protected by prompt order and disliked uncertainty. Second, loyalty to one of the tenants. Third, pressure from one of them. Fourth, personal involvement. You still don't make shopping lists. Number, I make categories. I got up and crossed to the window, then back. Did Pike have a relationship with Berin? Did you learn one? Not much, he said. Berin was exact, demanding, and paid on time. The night porter says Berin once helped Pike's daughter get a position with a broker. The cleaning woman says Pike and Vane spoke together twice last week, in the lobby, longer than either of them spoke to anybody without a lease. That last is useful. I thought so too. Wolf shut his eyes for a moment. And Hob, how does he regard Pike? Respectfully, maybe fearfully. Pike hired him, recommends him, and can make his life pleasant or stale. Then the mechanism is sound, Wolf said. A superior officer, a shaken employee, a desire for order, and a sequence repeated until it acquires the authority of memory. I said, Pike might still be innocent of murder. Certainly one may contaminate evidence without spilling blood. But if the nudge timeline shields somebody, then Pike either knew it or was used. Yes, that bothered me more than a straight lie would have. There is something especially unpleasant about falsehood that arrives in the clothes of help. Walter Hob, tidy and dutiful, may never have decided to perjure himself in his life. All he had to do was want to be accurate, be given a cleaner version of his own confusion, and then cling to it as if discipline were virtue. I told Wolf one more thing. Pike, said Walter, has always had a good head for numbers, but when I asked whether he'd ever before relied on Walter's minute, by minute recollection in disputes or building incidents, he got vague. Ah, he said, Walter is generally dependable, which is different from saying Walter has ever before recited a chronology like a train conductor. Yes. Wolf reached for the beer at last and took a measured swallow. Pike is lying by implication. He wishes us to believe Hobbs' exactness is long-standing habit. In fact, it may be recent manufacture. There's your lesson in precision. He leaned back further. Now the field alters. If Pike helped polish Hobbs' account, then we ask not merely who benefits from the timeline, but who had opportunity to influence Pike before or immediately after the death. Mira. Yes. Vane. More likely. Corwin. Perhaps, though doctors usually prefer medical ambiguity to mechanical chronology. I sat and looked at my notes. Vane is still the one who likes prepared statements, refined language, and plausible order. Yes, he is also the one most improved by being fixed safely downstairs at the supposed moment of death. And Mira is the one most exposed. Precisely. The symmetry of that annoyed me because it was so elegant it risked being another trap. Still, elegance is not always false. Sometimes it is merely expensive truth. Wolf said, Archie, yes. You will see Vane again, do not accuse. Discuss the deplorable unreliability of witnesses. Mention that Hobbs seems excellent. Then, as if idly, remark on Pike's kindness to his shaken operator. Watch carefully whether Vane treats that as new information or already digested material. That's subtle. Number it is ordinary. Try not to bruise it. I let that pass because his manners, when he is thinking well, have all the softness of office granite. There was a knock at the open door, and Fritz entered to announce that if lunch was to be eaten at all, an immediate decision by civilized persons would be welcome. Wolf glared at him, then at me, then at the ceiling, as if all three had conspired against appetite. Fritz withdrew unimpressed. I said, "You know what bothers me most? Your conversation." After that, he made an impatient motion. Walter Hobb may be honest in the only way that matters to him. He may have started with fog and ended with certainty because Pike, in the role of benevolent authority, helped him organize the fog. He's not protecting a lie he knows, he's protecting himself from having been uncertain. Yes, Wolf said. That is why he will be difficult. You cannot shake him by calling him false. You must force him to encounter the stages by which his confidence was built. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, in the old brownstone, with its books and orchids and the smells of Fritz's superior art pressing from the rear, the case had shifted once more. Walter Hobb's polished chronology no longer looked like simple invention. It looked instructed, not by a blunt command to falsify, but by a series of helpful corrections from Edwin Pike, the building manager. In the hour after Alfred Berrin's death, that was worse in some ways than perjury. A coached witness can be more dangerous than a dishonest one, because he clings to the error as if it were moral property. He has been improved, not corrupted, and improvement is hard to pry out of a proud man. Wolf did not believe in kindness that sharpened recollection. He believed in use, and somewhere between Pike's coffee, Walter's anxiety, and the brass wall clock above the cage, somebody had used both. Chapter 7. The strings on the bottle, a murder will often wave one hand at you, and hide the real business in the other. That is why Wolf distrusts anything obvious enough to look helpful before noon. By Tuesday morning, the whiskey bottle on Gerald Mowbray's desk had become, in the minds of at least 3 people, either poison, temptation, or atmosphere. Inspector Kramer, who came in scowling at 10:30 and sat down only because standing would have required more optimism, took the third view. The bottle is window dressing, he said. If it held poison, the lab would have found it. If it didn't, it's just part of the fancy package. Wolf, with a beer glass at his elbow and his eyes half shut, said. Number Kramer glared. No what? No. It is not just part of the package. It is part of the lie. That improved my morning. Kramer's eyebrows went up, which always gives him the expression of a man surprised by his own temper. I said, you might tell him before luncheon. He bruises easily. Wolf ignored me. He held up the inventory slip I had brought from Riddle Street the night before. Mowbray's own decanter on the side table was used. The gift bottle was not. Kramer grunted. So he preferred his usual drink. Number he preferred his usual ritual. The distinction matters. He turned to me, Archie. Yes, sir. State it. I had it ready because he had made me say it twice already. Mrs. Vale says Gerald poured himself a drink at 6 from the gift bottle when it first arrived, or what she thought was the gift bottle. Iris Dane says he sampled whiskey before dinner. Helen says the bottle from the parcel stood on the desk later, still handsome and full. Yesterday, when I checked the kitchen tray and the sideboard, I found the real answer. Gerald had poured from his own decanter while waiting in the study. The gift bottle had never been opened at all. Kramer turned to me. You sure? Yes. The seal was intact until the lab broke it. Gerald had been drinking, but not that. Wolf nodded. Therefore, the bottle was never meant to be consumed. It was meant to be seen. That was the hinge. The whiskey had not been sent to be drunk. It had been sent to complete a picture, silver, rare spirit, elegant note, private hour, luxury as credential, Kramer said. That proves what? The sender had taste. It proves the sender understood Mowbray's eye better than his throat. Wolf said. The bottle was not refreshment. It was scenery, I added. And good scenery, expensive enough to look sincere, untouched enough to remain impressive. Wolf gave me the slightest glance of approval, which from him is a civic decoration. Yes, a man expecting a profitable secret interview likes to be reassured that he is dealing with someone serious, solvent, and suitably deferential. The unopened bottle served that purpose. Kramer snorted. That's psychology? No, Wolf said. It is arrangement. He pushed the bottle aside with one finger and reached for a length of cord in an envelope. Now we come to something less debatable. That item had come from a study drawer in Gerald Mowbray's desk. When I first saw it, it looked like nothing worth carrying home. 3 lengths of fine grey-brown cord, neatly coiled, used for bundling papers. But Wolf had made me bring them anyway, because he trusts what people leave in drawers more than what they put on display. Beside the cord from the drawer lay the cord from the parcel. At a glance they looked alike. At Wolf's glance, they became cousins, siblings, and then near twins. Kramer leaned forward. String. Wolf's lips compressed. Cord, twisted linen, narrow gauge, waxed lightly, not common shop twine. Maybe half the city uses it. No, I said. That's the pretty part. I told him what I had learned the day before. Gerald's papers were kept in several bundles, invoices, letters from dealers, auction notes, and certain private memoranda tied up with that same linen cord. Mrs. Vale didn't use it. Helen Mowbray never touched those packets if she could help it. Gerald himself used ribbon for anything ceremonial and rubber bands for anything temporary. Only one person in the house habitually used the grey-brown cord for bundling documents. Iris Dane. Kramer looked at Wolf. You sitting on that? I was waiting to see if your intelligence would surprise me. It did not. That got him a fresh scowl. Iris had a secretary's appetite for order. She liked packets tied square, labeled, and stacked. In the small correspondence room upstairs, I had found a whole box of the same linen cord in her desk tray, cut into practical lengths. She had said it came from a stationer and meant nothing, which may have been true, except that murder often leaves its fingerprint in the unnecessary detail. Wolf said exactly that. The cord on the parcel did not have to match anything in the house, he said. The sender could have used shop ribbon, ordinary string, or no cord at all. Instead, he used a material already present in Mowbray's domestic routine and distinctive enough to be noticed only after the fact. That is characteristic. Crime often betrays itself not by the necessary act, but by the unnecessary elegance. Kramer's gaze shifted to me. You're buying this. I'm well into ownership. He muttered something impolite and leaned back. The office had grown quiet, except for the city outside doing its Monday work badly. Wolf touched the cord with one broad fingertip. Observe the use of the bottle, he said. It exists to persuade. Observe the use of the cord. It exists to personalize. The sender wanted the parcel to look costly, apt, and somehow domestic to Mowbray's world. Not foreign, not shop-made, not theatrical. Familiar luxury. I said, so the bottle is an expensive fake, and the cord is a small betrayal. Not merely because she owned cord, because she understood the house's texture. She knew what would look natural on Mowbray's desk, and what would look merely purchased. Kramer grunted. Still doesn't kill him. No, Wolf said. But it narrows the hand that dressed the stage. That was what the chapter had been building toward all along. The unopened bottle stripped away one illusion, and the cord tightened another. Gerald had not been offered a drink by the sender. He had been offered an impression of refinement and means, and the parcel had not been tied with random string from a shop counter. It had been finished with material that belonged to the house's own habits, I said. There's more. If Iris tied documents with that cord, Gerald would see it without consciously seeing it. The parcel would feel right. Wolf nodded. Excellent. Familiarity often works below notice. One recognizes not an object, but its appropriateness. Like a forged signature that looks right at a glance. Something of the sort. Kramer stood up. If you want me to bring in Iris Dane, say so. Wolf glared at him. Certainly not. You would frighten her into caution and deprive me of utility. Sit down. Kramer did not sit, but he also did not leave, which with him is practically obedience. Wolf went on. We are not finished. The bottle tells us the parcel was theatrical, not poisonous. The cord tells us the sender had access to or knowledge of Iris Dane's materials. That may mean Iris herself, or someone close enough to her room or worktable to borrow intelligently. That widens it again, I said. Number it deepens it. The crime was arranged by someone who understood not only Mowbray's pride, but the household's habits. That is better. I thought of Gerald's study as we had reconstructed it, lamp-lit card in hand, silver opener out of its case, unopened luxury bottle standing like a promise, not a man preparing to drink, a man preparing to receive the appearance of importance. Every object in the room had been chosen to tell him he was being approached correctly, and the cord, that little strip of linen no one would think of twice, had come trailing in from the daily machinery of the house itself. Murder often leaves its fingerprint in the unnecessary detail, Wolf said again, this time not to us but to the room. He was right. The necessary detail was simple: lure Gerald privately and kill him. But necessary details are often disguised successfully. The unnecessary ones are vain. They show taste, habit, ego, method, an unopened bottle, a particular cord. A parcel made not merely expensive, but convincing. Kramer finally went, taking his scowl with him. When the door had closed, I looked across at Wolf. Well, he said. Miss Dane now interests me very much indeed, because of the cord. Because of the cord, the style, the understanding of Mowbray's rituals, and the fact that she, more than anyone, lived at the junction of his papers, his vanities, and his private appointments. That sounds nearly like accusation. Number it sounds like progress. He reached for the beer and drank. Outside, a horn protested somewhere down the block. Inside, the old brownstone settled around us in books and warmth and cultivated silence. The whiskey bottle had seemed important because it was expensive. In fact, it mattered because it was untouched. Its luxury was performative. Its purpose was not to intoxicate Gerald Mowbray, but to reassure him. The finer clue was the smaller one, the cord around the parcel, matching the lengths in the study drawer, and the secretary's own supply. That was how the trap had been made convincing, not by extravagance alone, but by intimate correctness. And Nero Wolfe, who trusted unnecessary details more than necessary lies, had finally found a thread worth pulling. Yes, you've got enough. I have enough to begin pressing. The rest will come from resistance. That was honest, and from Wolfe honesty about incompletion is the most alarming sign of all. He had not solved it yet, but he had the device by which the case had been bent. Walter Hobbs' testimony had been polished into exactness by corrected minutes that did not belong to the faulty clock he watched. The witness was not lying in the simple sense. He was repeating time that had been handed to him already cleaned. And once Nero Wolfe knows a witness is speaking with another man's precision, it is only a matter of patience before he discovers. Whose mind did the cleaning? Outside, Riddle Streetward by now be going about its Sunday decencies, doors closed, curtains steady, reputations intact. Inside the old brownstone on West 35th Street, Wolfe had found the first real fracture in the polished schedule. The police were cherishing a brass clock 5 minutes slow. That was all. And it was enough. Chapter 8. The man who needed a timeline by Monday morning. The case had ceased to be merely a murder in an office and had become what Wolfe likes best and most deplores at once, a system. Once, you know that a witness is not speaking from his own rough memory, but from a chronology inserted into him by somebody else. You stop asking who is dramatic enough to kill, and begin asking who is administrative enough to require the minutes afterward. Murder is often heat. Timelines are cold. A man who needs one has usually gone beyond panic and arrived at self-protection. That man, by noon, looked very much like Edwin Pike. I had gone back to the Ashcroft building early under orders from Wolfe, who had delivered them over breakfast with his usual tenderness. You have the manager, now earn him. That sounds indecent. It sounds laborious. Do not confuse the two. So I went and earned him. Tidwin Pike received me in the little building office at the rear of the lobby, where a steel filing cabinet, a green-shaded lamp, and several ledgers contrived to suggest that civilization itself depended on his signature. He had the face of a man who had spent 20 years disapproving of leaks, late rent, and personality. Compact, brisk, self-important, and too conscious of efficiency to imagine it could ever look like vanity. "Goodwin," he said when I entered. "If this is about the clock again, it's been sent out for repair. That's public spirit. I run a building. So I've heard. You also run witnesses." His mouth flattened. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Nothing yet. I only came to ask whether, when you and Walter Hobb reconstructed the fatal evening, you corrected his times to allow for the clock being 5 minutes slow." That hit exactly where Wolf had predicted it would. Pike's eyes moved once to the side, not in fear but in irritation, which is even better. A frightened man may bolt, an irritated one wants to argue. "We did not reconstruct anything," he said. "Walter merely settled down and remembered more clearly, conveniently more clearly. Accurately. Not from the clock above the cage." He folded his arms. "Mr. Goodwin, I don't know what games Mr. Wolf enjoys in his office, but here we deal in facts. That's a relief. Let's have some." "Alfred Berrin was about to expose you." That landed harder. Not because he flinched. Pike was too managerial to flinch on schedule, but all the briskness went out of him at once and was replaced by something denser, which is what happens when a man discovers the wrong drawer has been opened. "You are talking nonsense." "Number. I'm talking maintenance accounts." He stared. "False repair contracts, inflated invoices, work charged twice, once to operating expenses and once to tenant improvements. Sign-offs carrying your initials on jobs that either cost half what was billed or were never done at all." His lips moved once and stopped. "Good. If a man can't find his mouth, he's hearing you." "Berrin found it," I said. "Not the whole thing at once. Alfred Berrin never found anything all at once. He savored discovery, but he found enough. He had threatened exposure, dismissal, and prosecution within the week," Pike said, very carefully. "Who told you that?" "That is always a heartening question. Innocent men ask what you mean. Guilty men ask who has been talking. I gave him none." "Did he?" Pike sat down behind the desk because standing had ceased to look executive. Mr. Berrin had raised questions. "That sounds graceful." He questioned a number of long-standing practices, including theft. His face hardened, including accounting methods normal to building operations, normal if one enjoys prison architecture. He was silent long enough to prove the value of silence, I pressed. Berrin had access to the ledgers because the Ashcroft interests overlapped some of his financing, and because he trusted nobody's arithmetic except his own. He sees irregularities. He asks questions. He discovers forged maintenance accounts and false repair contracts, signed off by the manager. He gives you a week. That sound familiar? Pike looked at me with a weariness that arrived too late to be innocent. "Mr. Berrin enjoyed threatening men. Yes, but he liked carrying it through when money was involved. That was the central truth about Alfred Berrin. He might bluff in family matters, flirt with cruelty in social ones, but once books and signatures entered the room, his appetite sharpened. Pike said nothing further, and I let him keep his silence because at that point it had become useful to me. Back at the brownstone, Wolf listened to the account without interruption. He had one finger pressed against the bridge of his nose, which meant the machinery in his head was turning over something with all the elegance of a locked safe. When I finished, he said, "Good. That's 2 goods in one day. I'm getting spoiled. Number, you are getting tiresome." He lowered his hand. Now, motive joins method. That was exactly it. Until then, Edwin Pike had been attractive as a technician of false chronology, administrator, corrector, polisher of witness statements. But men do not usually risk murder or its concealment merely to assist clarity. They need something harder. Now he had it. I said he had access to schedules, security notes, tenant habits, and Walter's confidence. He also had a week before Alfred Berrin exposed him, fired him, and possibly marched him into prosecution with a bundle of repair invoices under one arm. Yes, And if Berin dies, Pike still needs the aftermath handled. Precisely. Wolf leaned back. That is the important point. Pike did not merely need Berin dead. If dead, he wished him. He needed a timeline that would protect himself and direct suspicion elsewhere. A manager cannot vanish from his own building. He must remain visible, practical, indispensable. Therefore he uses the simplest available instrument, Walter Hobb. Simple and dutiful, I said. Yes, a man trained by years of routine to believe order is virtue. Such men are especially vulnerable to correction. The office was quiet, the brownstone holding its usual weather of books, rugs, and methodical comfort. Outside, March had turned the city damp again, and the windows wore a grey light that suited homicide better than most sunshine does. Fritz moved somewhere in the back with the sounds of moral cuisine. Upstairs the orchids were probably receiving water, without appreciating how much cleaner their society was than ours. Sai said, "Let's walk the shape now. Pike knows. Berin has him cornered on the false contracts. Berin is exact enough to expose him and hard enough to enjoy it. Pike either kills him or helps make the opportunity for killing. Afterward he sees Walter's uncertain recollection and improves it into a clean schedule that pushes suspicion away from himself and toward the tenants already in the frame." Wolf nodded. Yes, not a lie shouted into a witness's ear, merely refinement. Mrs. Berin at 10 past, Vane at 22, Corwin at 31. No one after. Speak it once. Then again, then once more with coffee. Soon the sequence becomes moral property. And Walter defends it because he thinks it proves he is useful. Yes, that was the ugliness of it. Walter Hobb did not have to be crooked. He only had to be eager to be exact. And a man like Pike could make use of that as easily as another man uses string. I said, "Do you think Pike killed Berin himself?" Wolf's mouth tightened. Do not leap. The timeline helps Pike regardless. If Berin dies by another hand, Pike still has reason to shape the aftermath. If Pike killed him himself, the same skill serves doubly. We are not yet entitled to choose. That's you all over. Everybody gets to stay possible until dinner. Not everybody. Only those not yet disproved. I gave him one more item. Alice Fenn remembered something after I left the building. Berin had asked her on Tuesday to fetch the maintenance binders from Ashcroft Management, specifically the ones signed by Pike over the last 6 months. She thought it was some lease matter. It wasn't. Wolf's eyes opened wider. Excellent. He was building the case. Yes, and therefore increasing Pike's danger with every page. That settled motive as neatly as anything likely to come gift. Rapt Edwin Pike had not merely feared annoyance, argument, or dismissal. He had feared paper. In a world of financiers, paper can kill a career more completely than bullets. And Alfred Berin had been one of those men who understood both the weapon and the pleasure of using it. I said, "Kramer will like this." "No," Wolf said. "He will like the arrest. This he will distrust because it requires him to admit that chronology can be more dishonest than blood." That sounds poetic for police work. It sounds burdensome. He reached for the beer and drank. Pike needed a timeline. Remember that phrase? Not an alibi in the common sense, a structure into which all movement would fit except his own risk. Such men are often more dangerous after the act than before. They tidy. I sat back and let it settle. That was the title of the chapter and the heart of it. The man who needed a timeline, not Mirror, whose dependence on Alfred was old and emotional, not Vane, whose quarrel over funds gave him motive but not administrative reach, not Corwin, whose knowledge of Berin's nerves could explain medical ambiguity, but not elevator precision. Edwin Pike alone stood where schedule, access, paper, and self-interest crossed. He had control of the building's internal habits. He had Walter's trust. He had reason to fear Alfred Berin's exactness more than anyone else in the case, and once Berin was dead, he had every reason to make the evening line up cleanly for the police, with minutes attached and suspicion directed toward more decorative candidates. "Tomorrow evening," Wolf said, "we gather them. There it is. Yes, Mirror, Vane, Corwin, Ashcroft, Pike, Walter, all. And Kramer, I dislike accusing men without a policeman present to enjoy it. That sounded fair. And from Wolf, fairness is a form of luxury rationed carefully. Outside, the Ashcroft building would still be standing over Riddle Street with its limestone face and brass decorum, preserving the fiction that offices are cleaner than the men who rent them. Inside its lobby, Walter Hobb would still be guiding people up and down with dutiful hands and borrowed certainty. Edwin Pike would still be sitting among ledgers, repair slips, and the remnants of his own authority, hoping perhaps that a neat story once told often enough becomes the same thing as truth. But in the office on West 35th Street, Nero Wolfe had at last found motive proportionate to manipulation. Alfred Berrin had discovered forged maintenance accounts and false repair contracts signed off by Pike. He had threatened exposure, dismissal, and prosecution within the week. Pike needed more than Alfred Berrin silenced. He needed the minutes afterward. Chapter 9. The ride that never happened. By Tuesday afternoon, Wolfe had the case in that stage which is hardest on everybody except Wolfe. The stage where the facts have stopped drifting and begun to lock. He was in the office behind his desk with one hand on the arm of the chair and the other near the beer glass, his eyes half shut in that look of indolent oppression which fools mistake for comfort and I know for danger. I had just got back from Riddle Street with one last useful item from the Ashcroft Building service staff, and when I gave it to him he merely grunted. That meant he had expected it. "Well," I said. "Well," he echoed. "Now we have route. That sounds like a transit map. It is. Murder is often a matter of routes." I sat down. "You want to astonish me, or shall I work for it?" "You shall listen," he said. "That is already work for you." That was Wolfe with the gloves on. He leaned back. The elevator testimony was false, not in the childish sense that Walter Hobb sat down and invented times out of malice, but in the more interesting sense that his uncertainty was cultivated into exactness. We know the brass wall clock above the cage ran 5 minutes slow. We know Hobb claimed to rely upon it, yet the times he recites are corrected times, not the clock's faulty ones. Therefore they were supplied later from another source. Yes, we know also that Edwin Pike spent nearly an hour with Hobb after the body was found, under the pretense of kindness. During that hour, Hobb's vague first account, somewhat after 8, some minutes later, around past, hardened into a schedule fit for framing. Pike did not tell him to lie. He improved him. "That still sounds like Pike," I said. "Of course it sounds like Pike. That is because Pike is a clerk with ambition and a thief with habits of order." That was one of the nicer things Wolfe had said all week. He went on. "Now motive." Alfred Berrin had discovered forged maintenance accounts and false repair contracts signed off by Pike. He was assembling the papers. He had threatened exposure, dismissal, and prosecution within the week. Pike therefore needed Berrin neutralized. But more than that, he needed the subsequent history of the evening controlled. An administrator who murders in his own building must leave behind not confusion but explanation. A timeline. Precisely. The office was still except for the occasional hush of traffic outside and one remote clatter from the back, where Fritz was making the excellent mistake of believing supper could improve if left in peace. Wolfe ignored the world, which is one of his major gifts. I said, "All right." Pike needed Berrin dead and Walter polished. But how did he get to 7 without Walter seeing him? Wolfe's eyes opened fully. By not using the elevator. That landed with pleasing force. "The service stair," I said. "Yes." That was the item I had brought him. The Ashcroft building had a service stair running from basement to roof, used by cleaning staff, electricians, plumbers, delivery men who lacked Polish, and anyone with reason to avoid notice. It opened on each floor behind a fire door near the rear corridor. I had walked it myself. A man leaving Pike's office in the lobby could slip into it without crossing Walter's line of sight, go up to 7 and enter the corridor from the back, invisible to the elevator, therefore absent from Walter's memory for the excellent reason that there had been nothing to remember. I said, and nobody thought to mention it because elevators are more glamorous than stairs. Yes, modern life has enfeebled attention. I let that pass because a man who refuses elevators personally should not be too hard on civilization for using them. Then Pike waited, I said. Number he did not wait, he prepared. Observe the sequence. Mira Berin goes up and down. Vane goes up and down. Corwin goes up and down. Walter notices these movements because they are his function. Pike, downstairs, has every opportunity to know them as well. The building is now quieting. Walter is occupied with ordinary traffic. Pike uses the service stair to go up to Berin's office after the recognized visitors have come and gone. After Corwin, yes. Almost certainly after Corwin. That makes Corwin the last official caller and gives Pike the gap. Precisely, a gap he later enlarges and cleans. I got up and crossed to the globe, spun it half an inch, and came back. What happened upstairs? Wolf's mouth tightened. An argument, not a premeditated theatrical encounter, but a practical one under pressure. Pike confronts Berin, likely over the documents or over Berin's demand for resignation before exposure. Berin being Berin presses. He was not a man to soften with danger. He would have enjoyed having Pike cornered. That sounds like Alfred. Yes. And Pike kills him. Yes, how? Wolf shrugged one heavy shoulder. By force sufficient to the body, the bruising at the throat was noted from the first. Berin may have been seized, forced back, throttled in part, or knocked against the desk edge. The smashed watch under him fits a struggle or collapse at close quarters. The essential point is not elegance of method but proximity. That was fair. Murder in offices is seldom poetic unless the writer is dishonest, I said. And after, Wolf said. Pike returns downstairs by the service stair as he came. He is in his own territory again, lobby, service room, operator, records, calm. When the body is discovered and Walter gives his first approximate account, Pike sees at once what must be done. Walter's vagueness is dangerous. Approximation leaves room for inquiry, so Pike does what administrators do best. He regularizes. That word was good enough to deserve theft, and I stole it mentally. He sits with Walter, Wolf continued, under the guise of kindness. Coffee, quiet, reassurance. Then the leading questions. Mrs. Berin was at 10 past, wasn't she? Mr. Vane shortly after 20 past, the doctor around half past, and down at 20 to 9. No one after. Excellent, Walter. Very good. You have a head for numbers. Speak it again, and once more. In an hour uncertainty has become sequence. By morning sequence has become conviction, I said. And Walter does not lie because he wishes to deceive. He lies because someone stronger has handed him a memory and told him it is his own. Wolf nodded. Exactly. That was the chapter. Not the murder alone, but the pity of it. Walter Hobb had not chosen villainy. He had chosen usefulness. A dutiful man who prides himself on order is the easiest man in the world to correct. Give him approval, a calm authority, and a cleaner version of what he half remembers, and he will cling to it not merely as fact but as self-respect. I said, you sound almost sorry for him. I am sorry for precision when it is misused. It is one of the nobler human capacities. That was Wolf at his rarest, almost humane without admitting it, I asked. Can you prove Pike used the stair? Number, that's cheerful. Do not interrupt. I can prove that the elevator schedule is manufactured, that Pike had motive to manufacture it, that he had access to the witness and to the service route omitted from the police story, and that Berin's discovery of Pike's false accounts placed Pike under immediate threat. The rest will come from pressure. There it is again, the office gathering. Obviously. I looked at him. You enjoy that word. It is useful because it ends conversation. I ignored that, and Vane. Vane remains what he has been from the outset, a beneficiary of the false chronology, possibly appreciative of it, perhaps even encouraging of it, but not necessarily the murderer. A man may welcome a distortion without creating it. That improved the shape. Harold Vane, dry lawyer with shifted funds and excellent reasons to like distance between himself and Alfred's last hour, may have looked good under Walter's polished testimony. But Wolf was done with looking good. He wanted need. And Edwin Pike had needed the minutes afterward as badly as he had needed the dead man. I said, "There's a nasty little beauty to it. The ride that matters is the one nobody took." Yes. No elevator, no operator's memory, no record except the service stare everyone ignores because it smells of mops and electricians. Precisely. Murder often travels by the route respectable people forget exists. That was handsome enough to annoy me. The afternoon light had gone flatter by then, and the room had that settled brownstone stillness that always comes before one of Wolf's arrangements. Upstairs, the Orchids would be finishing their day. Downstairs, Fritz was probably considering whether a source can survive genius. New York beyond the curtains went on with its bargaining, swearing, hurrying, and casual ruin. Inside, Wolf had reconstructed the last useful lie in the case. Pike had not ridden the elevator because he could not. Walter would have seen him. So he went up by the service stair, confronted Alfred Berin after the recognized callers had come and gone, and killed him in the privacy of the 7th floor office while the building below went about its night. Then he came down not as a murderer but as a manager, calm in his own lobby, ready to handle the consequences. And he handled them expertly. He did not tell Walter Hobb to lie outright. He did something meaner and cleverer. He asked leading questions, repeated times, praised accuracy, and replaced uncertainty with confidence. Walter, simple and dutiful, did what such men do when guided by authority. He accepted the improved version and made it part of himself. By the time the police heard him in the morning, he was no longer giving a statement. He was reciting a lesson in precision, and by Tuesday evening Nero Wolfe intended to make the teacher stand up in class. Chapter 10. The floor where truth stopped on Wednesday at 6 o'clock, the office on West 35th Street, contained as much strained composure as the room could hold without cracking the plaster. Wolfe had ordered the chairs brought in from the front room and arranged in the usual semicircle that means only one thing in our establishment. Someone is about to stop feeling safe. The yellow lamp on his desk cast a warm light over the blotter, the beer glass, and the stack of papers he had placed there with suspicious neatness. Outside, a cold March rain had begun again and tapped at the windows as if asking admission to the performance. Inside, Fritz had served beer to Kramer, coffee to those who preferred to preserve the appearance of innocence, and had then retired to the hall with the discretion of a man who knew perfectly well that civilization was again being defended in his house by improper methods. Present were Inspector Kramer, already red at the edges from anticipation, Edwin Pike, building manager and would be custodian of all orderly falsehoods, Walter Hobb in his uniform, pale and grave, and trying hard not to look at anyone directly, Mira Berin, dark and controlled, Harold Vane, dry and self-contained, Dr. Seth Corwin, broad and skeptical, Lawrence Ashcroft, offended on behalf of his building, and Alice Fenn, who had earned the right to hear the end by knowing too much from the start. Wolfe looked them over as if pricing furniture. Then he said, Alfred Berin died because Edwin Pike required not merely his death, but a chronology after it. Nobody moved. With Pike, that in itself was movement. His shoulders went still in the way men's shoulders do when they discover their bodies have been listening. Kramer said, "Go on." Wolfe inclined his head half an inch. Mr. Berin had recently discovered forged maintenance accounts and false repair contracts, approved by Edwin Pike. He was assembling the documents and had threatened exposure, dismissal, and prosecution within the week. That gave Pike motive. It also gave him urgency. A man who steals by paperwork fears paperwork more than most men fear knives. Pike said, "This is outrageous." Wolfe ignored him. But motive alone is a cheap commodity. We require method. The police found method in Walter Hobb's elevator testimony. Mrs. Mira Berin up at 8, 10 and down at 8. 17, Harold Vane up at 8, 20, 2 and down at 8, 29, Dr. Corwin up at 8:30, 1 and down at 8:40, no one after. Convenient. Too convenient. Vane said coolly, "If the operator observed it, convenience is irrelevant." No, Wolf said. It is central. Mr. Hobb first gave a vaguer account on the night of the crime. A little after 8, some minutes later, around 9:30, near 20 to 9. By morning this had ripened into exact minutes. That improvement in memory interested me. Honest memory is uneven. It hesitates, it qualifies. It remembers first one corner and then another. Mr. Hobb's recital had become smooth. Walter Hobb swallowed. Wolf turned his eyes to him, not cruelly, which is rare enough with Wolf to count. Mr. Hobb said. He fixed the times by looking at the brass wall clock above the elevator cage. Yes, sir, Walter said faintly. Yes, Wolf said. Unfortunately for this explanation, the clock had been 5 minutes slow for weeks. Mr. Pike knew it, the porter knew it, the janitor knew it. You knew it, Mr. Hobb. Yet the times you gave the police were corrected, times, not the faulty clock's times. Kramer let out a slow breath through his nose. Pike's jaw tightened. Mira Berin looked at Walter then, and there was pity in it before there was suspicion. Wolf continued. Therefore the schedule could not have come from Mr. Hobb's direct observation as he claimed. It came from later correction, and we know who had the opportunity to supply that correction. After the body was found, Edwin Pike kept Walter Hobb with him nearly an hour before the next police statement. Coffee, reassurance, and what he called kindness, Pike said sharply. The man was shaken. Certainly, Wolf said, and a shaken man with a professional pride in exactness is very easy to improve. One does not tell him to lie. One merely asks whether he is not sure Mrs. Berin came at 10 past, whether Mr. Vane was not shortly after 20 past, whether the doctor did not leave near 20 to 9. One praises his excellent head for numbers. One repeats the sequence aloud until uncertainty begins to feel like incompetence, and the improved version begins to feel like truth. Walter made a small sound in his throat. Wolf's voice stayed level. That is what happened. Pike snapped. Nonsense. No, Wolf said. What you prefer is nonsense. This is mechanism. He leaned back. As for the murder itself, Pike did not use the elevator. He used the service stair. Ashcroft started. The service stair. Yes, the route respectable people forget because it smells of maintenance and labor. It allowed Pike to go up after the recognized callers had come and gone, without entering Walter Hobb's field of observation at all. He confronted Berin in the 7th floor office, where Berin, being Berin, would have pressed his advantage and enjoyed doing so. There was an argument. Berin ended dead, with bruising at the throat and the smashed watch under him from the fall or struggle. Pike then returned downstairs by the same stair and resumed his managerial usefulness just in time to contaminate the witness. Pike half rose from his chair. You can't prove I went upstairs. No, Wolf said. I can prove that the elevator timeline excluding you is false, that you had motive to falsify it, that you had access to the only witness, that the clock used to justify his certainty was wrong, and that Berin had in his possession the beginnings of the case that would have destroyed you. If you require more, I recommend prayer. Inspector Kramer requires less. That was good enough to warm the room. But it was Walter Hobb who broke first. He did not leap up, pound the arms of his chair, or indulge in any of the extras weak men think emotion requires. He simply put both hands flat on his knees and looked at them as if they had betrayed him. I didn't mean, he began, and stopped. No one spoke. Wolf knows the uses of silence too well to interrupt a man at the lip of self-disgust. Walter tried again. I didn't mean to tell wrong. I only Mr. Pike kept asking it over. Not roughly, he was kind. He said I'd surely noticed. Mrs. Berin at 10 past, wasn't it? Mr. Vane after 20. The doctor about 9:30, he said. I always had a head for figures, and I ought not let the police think me flustered. We said it through more than once. His face had gone the color of old paper. I thought maybe I had seen it that close, or ought to have, and by morning. He looked up helplessly, not at Pike but at Wolf. By morning it sounded like what I remembered. There, Wolf said softly, though his tone was for the room and not for comfort. Borrowed certainty. Walter's mouth worked. I never wanted to harm anybody. No, Wolf said. That is plain, Pike said. Walter, for God's sake. Kramer barked. Shut up. He lied because you gave him a memory and insisted it was his own. That alone might not hang you. Your accounts will assist. He lifted a packet from the desk. These are copies of maintenance vouchers, duplicate invoices, and repair contracts from the Ashcroft building accounts. Mr. Berrin had begun marking discrepancies in blue pencil. Several documents bear your approval on work billed twice, or not done at all, Miss Fenn. Confirmed that Berrin had asked for the maintenance binders 2 days before his death. You had less than a week, perhaps less than 3 days, before exposure. Pike looked at the packet as if it were something alive and personally obscene. You forged numbers, Wolf said. Then, after killing the man who found them, you tried to forge time. That did it. I have seen many collapses, but Pike's was unusually ugly because it was not dramatic. Nothing in him gave way gracefully. The briskness left first, then the managerial annoyance, then the self-importance. What remained was a man too long propped by routine, finding that routine had failed him. I only meant to stop him, he said. Kramer stood up. How? Pike did not look at him. He was staring at the desk packet, at the blue pencil marks perhaps, or at the figures that had seemed so manageable when they were only rent paper and not blood. He told me Tuesday, Pike said. Called me into his office and laid out 3 invoices and 1 contract, and asked whether I had become a fool or a thief. I told him building repairs are complicated, he said. Prison accounting is simpler. He gave me until the end of the week to prepare a full explanation before he took it to the owners and the district attorney. Ashcroft made a noise like a man swallowing litigation. Pike went on. I thought if I could get him alone Sunday night and see what he really intended, whether he wanted resignation, money, some arrangement. Wolf made a disgusted sound. You thought to negotiate with a financier over evidence of your own theft. Pike's face twisted. He liked that sort of thing. He liked a man cornered. That, Mira Berrin said quietly, is true. Pike gave her one startled glance and then looked away. The others had gone. I knew Walter was watching the elevator, so I took the service stair. Berrin was at the desk with the ledgers out. He did not even seem surprised, he said. At last, the rats do use the stairs. That sounded like Alfred Berrin. What happened? Kramer demanded. He wanted everything, Pike said. A confession in writing, resignation without reference. Repayment I could never make, and the pleasure of handing it over anyway if I annoyed him.